even growing up, like you heard stories. And, being a woman, there were certain people that the sisters would keep the girls away from. And I don't know, if it was because maybe elders had told heads of household about this certain individual, or because I know that does happen in some instances, but often not. Or if it was just like a sense, like maybe they shouldn't be around this person.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramacrow. I'm delighted to welcome onto the channel Elise Parse, who is a psychology student who used to be a Jehovah's Witness. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
As we were just commenting off air, as I understand it, you managed to extricate yourself from Jehovah's Witnesses around the age of 16, 17, and this has enabled you to go into the dreaded higher education, which, as we all know, is a path to debauchery and all sorts of nefarious things. So congratulations.
Why, thank you. I have it as a badge of pride on my shoulder. It definitely, with the Witnesses, is the oogie boogie man, so to speak. So
it is. So obviously you're now studying psychology, which I think is an incredibly important field. I obviously talk a lot on this channel about mental health and the need to take care of it. And I think the more people who understand, the complexities of the brain and how it works, the better. I'm wondering, before we kind of get stuck in, whether we can just kind of back up a little bit and learn a little bit more about your background with Jehovah's Witnesses and how you came to be involved.
Oh, of course. So I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So I was born into the religion. So I think in my studies, they call it enculturation. That's how, when you're a child, you develop in this environment that your parents provide.
Do they really call it inculturation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I've never
I found
heard
that
of
very
that phrase
interesting.
before. It sounds a little bit like infiltration, but instead it's inculturation. I'm going to have to use that more.
Or indoctrination.
Yeah, but I like inculturation, so I might steal that from you. Thank you.
Yeah. So pretty much, it's. I mean, if you look at the word, it pretty much is you're imbuing the culture of the family into the child. And so, as we know, Jehovah's Witnesses, it's a lifestyle. It's part of your identity. And so to have that instilled in me at a very young age, in preparation for coming on here, I really realized how much it has affected me and still does affect me to this day. I did. So I remember, during, I watched a couple of your videos and I was reminiscing about The Greatest Man Who Ever Lived book and Daniel's Prophecy book, because those were my two favorite books growing up in the religion. I
have Daniel's Prophecy on my desk still.
Yes.
When I was talking to Dr. Richard Carrier, I haven't got around to putting it back on the shelves yet. So yeah, please continue.
And so, I mean, those were, I loved the prophecies growing up. I think they were just like the best things ever. But I was a child. And so to me, these were like my Bible stories, my bedtime stories. But as I progressed, my dad, the way I got attention as a child was I was ready for meetings very early. I got myself ready. And so that was always like a pride point with my father. Talking about mental health, my mom, she was very mentally ill. She had a very traumatic childhood. Both of my parents did. They were both in abusive households. And I think that's really what drew them to the Witnesses. So my dad, I believe the story goes that they joined when he was 10. My mother joined when she was about 19, 20. They met while they were pioneering and they got married. And so then after that, my mom just had a really hard time mentally just keeping up with all of the things that you have to do as a witness. And so my dad started taking me to meetings when we would move. And people didn't know I had a mom at home because it was just kind of hush hush. Like, I'm sure you can relate, if a spouse isn't coming to the meetings, it's very much looked down upon. And my dad wanted to become an elder. So having that pressure growing up, it was a lot. Had to be good at the meeting, did tick marks every time I said Jehovah or Jesus, had to pay attention.
Oh, you did that game as well. Yeah,
yes.
Because it was so difficult for kids to pay attention that what we used to do is do this game where you'd write down like a list of words on the piece of paper, like Jehovah, Jesus, Bible, I don't know,
whatever the theme of the talk
whatever
was that day.
And whenever they'd say the word, you'd tick off just as like a rudimentary listening exercise. Wow. Okay. So I'm glad I'm not the only one that was doing that. Yeah.
And I learned how to do like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So groups of 5. And that's, it was fun.
Oh, you mean like tally marks? Yeah.
Tally marks. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, growing up as a witness, I didn't know any better. There were a couple instances because we did move around a lot. My father had a different kind of job. He was an accountant and he had a hard time keeping down a job. So we moved around a lot. So I went to very many different congregations. And many different schools. So I was always the new girl in school, but then to add the aspect of being a witness on top of that, it's just, it's interesting to look back on. So I have a couple stories. There was one story where a little girl came up to me and she's like, Elise, you're my best friend. And I looked at this child dead in the eyes and I said, you're not my friend. You're not Jehovah's friend. You're going to die in Armageddon. And I walked away. Yes.
That's harsh.
Yes. I was about 6 or 7 at the time. And they talk about that time as like, it's a very black and white period for children at that time. So, you're either, in my mind, you were either Jehovah's friend or you weren't Jehovah's friend. And it created a target on my back. I was the odd girl out. So, and then of course at like winter Christmas programs, whenever they started singing Christmas carols or songs, I'd stand up there and I'd lock my mouth and throw away the key, kind of like in a silent defiance to the whole thing. Yeah. And those were my younger years. I was I was pretty devout. But as teenagehood came about, things just didn't add up. I don't know how to explain it. I always had a passion for higher learning and I wanted to go to college. And I remember sitting during a meeting and hearing the elders speak about how higher education is wrong, how it's bad, how it's how Satan can change our mind about Jehovah and things like that. And, looking back at my younger years, even though I was super passionate and honestly, a lot of it was to get attention from my parents. The fire, the brimstone, the constant fear of messing up and not having that autonomy to myself of, I'm free to make mistakes and that's okay. Because as a child, you're going to make mistakes and that's how you grow up. That's life process. But it always felt like I was going to be smited, like Jehovah was going to see everything. And at the day of reckoning, I was just not going to make it. I still live with this fear to an extent, not so much as, I think Jehovah's going to smite me. But I remember
I got my bachelor's. You don't want to be smoked, do you?
I don't want to be smoked. No. I'd much rather be smitten, not smoked.
Yeah, smitten rather than smoked, please. Yeah. Okay, so you had this, well, you could say typical doomsday Jehovah's Witness upbringing where you're kind of chasing after the approval of your parents. And at the same time, you have this inner conflict surrounding higher education, which you're learning from the platform is a terrible thing, but it seems deep down you want to pursue. How did your parents respond to your, when you were talking to them about higher education?
So about this time, my both of my parents they had divorced, which honestly, that's kind of taboo. I was about 10 or 11 when that happened, and for a short period of time, my mom, she stopped going to the meetings. So I think this is where, like, as they say, my devout beliefs kind of go down. I start to just kind of hang out at home, watch cartoons. Mom's busy working, so I get to kind of have some alone time and maybe watch things that I'm not supposed to watch that have magic in it. Or I remember about this time the Harry Potter books came out. And I really related to Harry and him being in the cupboard and kind of not being able to be himself. So I latched onto that, and I would go walk to the library and I would read these books under those sleeping bags, like the sleeping bags where you can't see anything under. I'd be under my bed, and I'd make it look like I was in bed with my pillows, climb under my bed and read the books with a flashlight. So
wow. Yeah,
I know
just
that sounds silly.
Harry Potter. Yeah, but I can totally relate to that because Harry Potter never got called out, I don't think, in the literature, but I specifically remember at a circuit assembly, they named Harry Potter on the stage as being something that Jehovah's Witnesses shouldn't be reading. And as a result of that, I never read Harry Potter or watched a single Harry Potter film until very recently with Jessica. We started watching the films, so therefore I know about the in the cupboard reference, thankfully. Otherwise, I'd be like, "What are you talking about? What about the cupboard?" But it's mad, isn't it? How even something as innocent as that was frowned upon.
Yeah, and I remember my mom. She found out that I was reading them. And she burned the library book. We had to pay for it because she didn't.
I hope she had to pay for it.
Yeah, she had to pay for it, but she wanted, what were her words? It was, I would rather pay for it than other people be tainted by this filth or something like that, something to that degree. And it's comical to look back on. But so about that time, my mom was kind of battling back and forth, like, she was having a really hard time with her mental health. So she was having a hard time getting to the meetings. She had been diagnosed bipolar and then being diagnosed as borderline personality disorder, which for your viewers, just to clarify, is not dissociative disorder or what they call multiple personality disorder. They used to. Borderline personality disorder is pretty much you've experienced an extreme amount of trauma and you develop these really negative coping mechanisms to cope with that. So it's not a chemical imbalance. It's a maladaptive coping skill disorder, so to speak. So you have to do a lot of retraining of the brain, cognitive behavioral therapy, and things like that. So just so if you do put that in, viewers.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. So she was battling all of that and having a really hard time with that. And I mean, as you know, with the witnesses, especially in the 90s and before, mental health, it wasn't very much talked about. And so she wasn't making it to the meetings. My dad would come and pick me up for weekends, and I didn't want to go because I didn't want to go to the meetings. Like I would have to go to the meetings. And so I just didn't want to go. And then eventually as I got older, when I was 14, 15, I ended up moving in with my father due to some circumstances with my mother and her new husband at that time. She actually had gotten disfellowshipped because she got remarried. So that was an interesting process. I learned about how you can dissociate yourself through that process. I didn't realize that that was a thing that you could do in the witnesses until about that time. I was starting to get pressured.
It would have been probably viewed as an adulterous marriage if she remarried without there being grounds for divorce. That's probably what they did.
It was that, but she talked about dissociating herself too about that time.
Oh,
and
okay.
she thought, she talked about writing a letter to the elders. Like she was going back and forth on that. And I didn't know that that was a thing that you could actually write a letter to the elders and say, no, thank you, wash my hands clean. And I thought it was just disfellowshipping all the way around. And to me, in my mind, I was like, oh, well, Mom, that's worse. At the time, I was like, man, like, that's crazy. But I was having doubts of my own at this time, of course, just to see the treatment of my mother, and then to see just I was starting to see the backwardsness of the religion. I started having friends outside of the religion, started living a double life because that's how I could have my friends. Since my parents were divorced, it was easy to talk to my friends on the phone without my parents there, that kind of thing, because they were working. And I started to realize, well, maybe college is there for me. Maybe I can progress and do what I want to do. And at the time, I really wanted to be an author. I loved writing short stories in high school. I just loved it so much. Still do to this day. But I started writing stories, and of course I put like vampires and werewolves and magic into it. And so one day, this is before I moved back in with my father, my mother found all of my writings. I was at school. I went to school, and she went through my room and she found all my writings. And I had written quite a bit. It was my coping skills. So like on sleepless nights where I was like really worried if I was going to make it through Armageddon because I liked writing this material, I would just write more. Because I was like, at that point, I was like, well, if I'm going to die in Armageddon, might as well die an author.
Yeah. In for a penny, in for a pound. Yeah.
Pretty much. Might as well go all in. So my mom thought I was demonized because I had written so much in such a short time. And then to add into the content of the material, and some of it was rather dark. Edgar Allan Poe is another one of my favorite authors. And so there was a little bit of that darkness to it as well. And so I think that just kind of scared my parents because, of course, the witnesses teach you that all of that is wrong and it's just not okay. So she picked me up from school and she drove me an hour and a half back to my father and put me on his doorstep with a bag of my belongings and said, nope, she's your problem now. Yeah. And so then that was when I was about 14, 15.
And all because you'd written some stories about vampires.
It was about that. And it was a combination between that and they found out I had a boyfriend at school.
Right.
And so they were worried about the path that I was going down. Yeah.
And this was when your mother was disassociated, but still...
disfellowshipped. She had
disfellowshipped. Right.
I think about this time she had either started the process or she was in the middle of the process of getting put into the religion.
Right. So she was still very much indoctrinated despite being, disfellowshipped. Yeah.
Yeah. She didn't, she did eventually disassociate herself, but that was when I was about 20 when she did. She just kind of had enough, and we still don't have a talking relationship anymore just because of what happened. You can forgive, but at the same time, you can also, that pain is always there.
Yeah.
So she left me with my father, and I was about 15. Yep. It was about a year before I started the process of getting emancipated. And I remember I must have been 16. Yeah, I was 16 because it was my junior year. Junior year is when I started talking to him. And I remember we had to drive about 30 minutes to go to the Kingdom Hall because our Kingdom Hall was being sold and renovated. They were building a new one. And so we were driving this drive, and we just had a presentation at school about going to college, what you needed to do to prep to go to college, all of that jazz. And so I talked to him. I was like, hey, I really want to go look at colleges. Can we go look at colleges on the weekends or something like that? I still do live about 30 minutes away from a 4-year college. And then I'm like 2.5 hours away from Seattle, which has the University of Washington there. And then Spokane has another, or Pullman has another one as well. Those are the two main colleges here. And I remember him saying two things was, what about me? Who's going to take care of me? And I'm thinking at 16, I'm like, Dad, you're a grown man. You can take care of yourself. But those traditional values, those traditional roles had put me as caretaker of the house as well. And I'm not entirely sure. And I guess this is a question that I have. And is that the normal for other families that have been in Jehovah's Witnesses, that the woman takes care of the house just in general? Because even as his daughter, that fell to me as taking care of the house.
No, that's messed up. That's not normal. That's
okay.
Pretty messed up. I think even by most Jehovah's Witness standards, it's very, very peculiar for your father, who was an elder at this point.
No, he still wasn't. There's more to that story.
Was he a ministerial servant?
Yes, he was
right.
getting
so
to
it's very, very. It's odd for your father, who was a ministerial servant, to be looking upon you as the, what's the word, housewife when you're his 16-year-old daughter. Yeah, that's messed up. So yeah. I think we can be fairly safe there in saying that. Yeah.
Perfect. So, and then the second thing that he said was, well, what about your spiritual studies? What about your spiritualness? Don't you have aspirations to be a pioneer? And of course, over the course of my teenagehood, from 13 to 15, 16 at that point, of course, I had gone back and forth. Like, there were times where I was leading this double life, and it's a drain on yourself, period, because you're masking who you really are. And then you kind of lose this sense of self, like you don't know who you are. Because you really want to go, like for me, I really want to go to college. I want to have friends. But then I've been always raised in this, if I were to leave, I'm going to lose everybody. And I wasn't baptized at this point. And I'd been pressured to get baptized, and I just was like, I'm not ready. And there were other brothers and sisters, children that were getting baptized at 10, or for me in my heart, even thinking about that now, I'm like, do you understand? Like, they don't understand the gravity of that decision, at least in my mind. But even without being baptized, I was worried I was going to lose my full support system. And so there were times where I honestly tried. I would stop talking to my friends. I think there was one time when I started my junior year of high school, I was 15. I asked my father, I was like, hey, can I be homeschooled? I want to be homeschooled because I don't want to have the temptation. And I actually asked for this because I felt so guilty about living a double life. And I was kind of the black sheep of the girls of my group in the congregation in general. It's kind of odd to look back on it because they were all doing their own thing. They weren't being devout witnesses either. But I was the one that got caught.
Right.
Yeah. So I didn't really get along with many people my age in the congregation. And so that just makes it even more difficult at social gatherings and things like that. So of course I wanted to have my friends, I wanted to go to college, but then I also wanted to live up to what my father wanted and be a pioneer and really go. And I think I was announced as an unbaptized publisher 3 times. 3 times. And each of those times, I believe the terminology was reproved or not reproved. That title was taken away from me all 3 times publicly. And that was embarrassing. That was
that's out of the ordinary, I would suggest, to be, because typically what would happen is you would be announced as an unbaptized publisher, and then the next thing people know, you're getting baptized. So to be announced as no longer an unbaptized publisher, and then announced again as an unbaptized publisher, and for that to just be going kind of backwards and forwards, that's a bit out of the ordinary. And it certainly speaks to, a conflicted individual who isn't fully committed to the faith. Yeah.
And so of course I was going back and forth, and the time before junior year was my last time of that announcement, and then it being publicly announced that I wasn't. And at this point, of course there was a boy involved. Let's just be honest. I fell in love.
You were smitten rather than smote. Okay.
Yes, I was smitten rather than smote. And I owe a great deal to he was my very first boyfriend, like real boyfriend, I guess I could say. And I owe a lot to him and his family, because I told him and I explained to him about everything that happened in the religion, and how when I'd been brought in front of the elders, I think 3 times in regards to what I wrote, what I've written, also about some exploits with previous like relationships and stuff as a teenager. And let's just say talking about certain things with 3 older men in the room and them taking notes, it's degrading. And then for them to ask you if you enjoyed it and if you, how did it make you feel? It just felt very invasive. And as a teenage girl,
you were subjected to invasive questions of a sexual nature by the elders.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
I was. Yeah. And it's kind of like.
And sorry, at what age was this?
This was over the course of 14, 15.
From when you were 14 years old?
Yeah, 13, 14, 15. Yep. Okay. And of course, like, I would really like to say that it's just, it was just normal teenage exploration. Yet when I think you've explained this in some of your videos talking about your experience is when you're in this religion where even in the Young People Ask book, it talks about sex and things like that as very negative, very, you know, it it creates this wanting to try it, you know, almost being so strict about it and being unable to make mistakes without having these councils of elders talk to you. It creates this very weird cycle. I don't know how else to explain it.
It creates a very unhealthy relationship with sex in the mind
It does.
of a person. Yeah.
It does. It does. And so being subjected to that at a very young age, I hold some resentment to my parents. Like, I know they were just doing what they thought was the correct thing. But I would never, I have two children of my own, and I would never subject them to have those invasive questions asked. It's none of their business, you know? And so, well, it's none of the older people's business. So there was that. And then, so I became smitten with this boy, and he said, well, I talked to my mom, and I actually snuck over to his house and talked to his mom, and his mom is a very caring person and opened her home to me. And so I remember telling my father, hey, I don't want to be a witness anymore. It was Thursday night meeting. And I told him, Dad, I am not going. And
Wow.
he's like, well, yes, you are. And I said, he's like, go get ready for meeting. And I said, no, I'm not going. I don't want to be a witness anymore. And he sat there and he got ready and he left. And my first thought is, oh crap, he's going to bring home elders. Like, he's going to go home. They're going to go to meeting 9:30. He's going to be here with the elders, with some of the other fathers in the congregation because they're elders. And I was like, I'm not doing it. And I packed up my things and I went to my then boyfriend's house, and I didn't go back. He did call the police, and this is the part that I don't quite understand. And it was just because I was 16 at the time. He called the police, and they showed up at my boyfriend's house, and they asked me questions. They didn't make me go back. And I think it was because of my age. And I think it was honestly some of what that I told them. I was like, this is a very toxic environment. He doesn't put my dreams first as far as like wanting to go to college. And for worldly people, going to college and wanting to, get a career, that's the stuff that parents dream of. Like, let's be honest, they want their kids to go to college and get a degree and all of this stuff. So I think telling the police that, they were just like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense.
Even just before, when you were talking about saying to your father, hey, let's spend the weekend going around looking at colleges. It's like when Jessica and Julia are old enough to do that, I can't think of anything I would prefer to do. That would be just such an amazing experience to be with them at that crucial point in their lives where they're choosing which college or whatever they go to. For them to want me to be involved in that would feel like a privilege,
Right? Because that's just the next step of their life. They're going out into the world, but they still want that safety of that parent to kind of help them guide them through it. And it's, same with my kids. So they didn't make me go back. And I finished my junior year living with my boyfriend. And then during the summer, we went to court. I filled out papers and had them served. And emancipation, for those of your viewers who may not know, it's just pretty much, in simple terms, it's like a kid divorcing their parents and becoming an adult early, essentially. So they become completely independent. Of course, there are certain things, like I still couldn't buy things that had an age limit of 18. still. Those kinds of things didn't apply. But for all intents and purposes, I could write my own notes for school. I could make major life decisions for myself. And this was very, very interesting for me because when I moved back in with my dad, he worked maybe a block away from my high school. And so he would have me come to his work for lunch. So I wouldn't be around worldly kids. So I couldn't hang out with my friends, things like that. So all of a sudden I had all of this freedom. And I lost my family. Like, I'm not talking to my mother. I'm not talking to my father. My various aunts and uncles. One of my uncles was an elder in a Spanish-speaking congregation. So in a different city. So all of that was gone. And it creates, even though that was a very toxic environment, you still care about those people. And coming out of a cult situation, like, I was very naive. As I asked earlier, like, oh, well, is it normal for Jehovah's Witnesses families to look upon their daughters to take care of the house and all of that stuff? That was just the norm for me. So whatever my life was before that, it was normal. So I didn't know what was normal. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized, well, normal is kind of just what you make it, of course. But at the time, being 17 and being on my own, you kind of go crazy a little bit. You feel alone, you make mistakes, you feel that guilt again. And so it was a lot to deal with as a teenager and going into things. So here's a part of my story where it kind of gets sad because I wanted to go to college so bad, but the FAFSA laws, the financial aid laws in the United States at that time, I think it was like 2006, 2007, didn't include emancipated minors as independent students. So you still needed to get your parents' tax information to file for the financial aid. Well, that's kind of difficult when you're not speaking to them, and they're not going to support you with that anyways. So I ended up becoming a cashier at a pharmaceutical at Rite Aid, that had a pharmacy, and eventually they asked me to become a pharmacy cashier in the pharmacy, and then become a pharmacy technician. So I worked as a pharmacy technician. I was trained on the job, and it paid very well. And I did it for 10 years. And I want to say about year 6 of being a pharmacy technician, I was like, nope, I can't do this anymore. It's time to go back to school. And by that time I had two young children, and I went back to school, and I went through an online program, and I got my BA in psychology with a concentration in community mental health, with full intention of becoming a mental health counselor in a clinic. And then for my internship for my bachelor's degree, I ended up being in a high school, in a school counseling department. And that's when I changed I went from getting my master's in psychology to getting my master's in school counseling, because I really felt like I wanted to be the adult that I didn't have in a school setting for children. So, yep. So that's where I'm at now.
Wow. That's astounding. And the fact that you were able to navigate such a stressful situation from such a young age, and, make so many right decisions early on at a time when most people make terrible decisions.
Oh, I made terrible decisions.
Oh, I'm sure you did. But let's face it, the sum total of where you are now would suggest that overall, yes, you made some very good decisions. One of which was right decisions. Exactly. One of which was to get out of a toxic parental situation. So it speaks an awful lot to your your strength and wisdom. So now you are you a school counselor now?
So right now I'm in my final year of my master's program. And
Okay.
while, so I'm doing my internship. And while I got the opportunity to work with what they call a conditional school counseling license. So the school district petitioned the state of Washington saying, hey, she's in her program. She's going to be graduating at this time. We want to have her work in the position and we'll train her while she's finishing her school. So I'm also working in that capacity as well.
So you're
with,
working
of course,
in a role that you would ordinarily need to have first qualified for, but an exception has been made in your case, essentially, it sounds like. So
yep.
I know one of the things that you, your story alone is fascinating, and I'm sure will a lot of viewers will be able to relate to it and find it extremely compelling. But I know you, from your personal kind of professional experience, had a bit to say on mandatory reporting. Is that right?
Yes, I do. So throughout my schooling, and this started in my bachelor's piece, was, you go through the classes about sexual abuse and things like that. And my thought always went back to what's going on in the witnesses, because even growing up, like, you heard stories, and, being a woman, there were certain people that the sisters would keep the girls away from. And I don't know, if it was because maybe elders had told heads of household about this certain individual, or because I know that does happen in some instances, but often not. Or if it was just like a sense, like maybe they shouldn't be around this person. But you always hear stories. And my cousin, my older cousin, she's as old as my mom, but she's like my second cousin. She had she had something happen to her where even she was an adult when this happened, where someone sexually assaulted her, and she got disfellowshipped, but the perpetrator did not. I don't believe he even stepped down as an elder. So, and she was married, and so that put a strain on her marriage as well. And so, and that happened to an adult. So just think about what happens to children, especially they still have the 2-witness rule. There was an instance where I got really upset and mad, and it was one of the few times I reached out to my father. It was about 2020-ish, or maybe 2019. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, because at this time he was an elder. He actually got remarried in 2014. And he was an elder at that point, or at least I thought. And I called him and I said, hey, I want to know how elders take care of sexual assault allegations. Like what happens? I need to know the process. And he gave me this horrendous example. Is there anything that I should cut out or not say?
Cut out or not say? Well, from the horrendous example that he gave you, well, let's hear it,
Okay. So he said that when there are assault allegations, especially with a child, it's taken very seriously, that they do investigate it. Two or three elders get assigned to investigate it. This is 2019. So, and I did read the Shepherding the Flock book a little bit a while ago. I don't remember. It was 2019, the newest rendition, or was it? And there has a newer one came out since.
Well, They're coming out. Sorry, I think I might have disconnected something. They're coming out with revisions all the time, but I think 2019 was the most recent edition that they came out with. Yeah.
So he said that they investigated, and he gave me this example of a family coming in and a father had inappropriately touched their child and how they would navigate that. Pretty much they would call them in to a council. So they'd have, I think, still 3 elders there, at least 3 elders talking to them. And they would talk to the family about what they wanted to do. And they leave it up. How did he say? He's like, we call the legal department to make sure there's no legal obligation for mandatory reporting. So they call the office in New York, the legal department, and they give them advice. And then they talk to the family. And pretty much if the family doesn't want to report it, they don't report it, is what they said, is what he said. And so if you think about it, that means the child goes home with their abuser. Even if,
So
yeah.
So basically, and I think you would agree with this. The first point of contact when a crime's been committed should be the police.
Yes.
And so what we're talking
CPS
about
in this case.
Yeah, what we're talking about here is the authorities being essentially bypassed, and a surrogate set of authorities assuming the role of the authorities in investigating a crime and deciding whether it gets to be reported to the true authorities.
Yes,
go on.
And in lots of instances, I've heard the excuse of, it would just be a bad witness to Jehovah, that kind of thing. Also,
that's precisely it. You can think of any number of reasons why it would be in the interests of the organization that has assumed the role of surrogate authority to to make sure it all goes under the rug, because it's obviously in their interests for things not to be splashed across the papers or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, and what's really sad is so there was that conversation with my father, and then I recently had a conversation, I want to say a few months ago. So in between that, I found out that in Washington state, clergy are not mandated reporters per law, but they can opt into reporting if they wish, without fear of legal repercussions. And I remember my father saying that the reason they call the legal department is that since there's clergy pennant privilege, that they legally could be sued if they were to bypass that and report to the authorities without permission, essentially.
That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. You're not going to be sued if you forego clergy penitent privilege. There's no reason why you would be sued for that. Yeah.
And that's what I believe. I could be wrong, but I believe that's what the Watchtower is feeding the elders and telling them, well, this is why we do this. It's to protect you. And so I found out during my studies that Washington state isn't, that you can bypass it without legal repercussions. And I messaged him, I texted him, and I was like, hey, just so you know, there's this bypass in this law. And his response was, well, I would be worried about who would take advantage of that. AKA pretty much he was victim blaming to an extent, saying that somebody would make a false allegation to get somebody put into jail or something like that. I also remember him saying, well, it's not our place to judge others. It's Jehovah's place to judge. And it's not my job to judge a brother who's sinned. Pretty much saying, oh, we'll take the...
Would he use the same logic if a member of his congregation burgled him? Oh, it's not my place to judge. I have CCTV camera footage of him burgling me. But you know what? I'm not going to pass it on to the authorities because it's not my place to judge him. It's Jehovah's place. I think he'd be passing on the CCTV footage. And
I believe so
we're
as
talking
well.
about a burglary rather than actual sexual assault. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you hear a lot of these excuses, not just even with the witnesses, but with a lot of other religions as well. So, I mean, my experiences with the witnesses, but I do know, like I have a friend who's an ex-Mormon, and it is a lot of it is the same kind of propaganda. It's the same talking points, just a different religion too. So I had these conversations with my father, and these are the conversations I'm reaching out to him about, like, hey, maybe I can facilitate some change, even if it's a small one, at least in one congregation. And then I finally realized that every time that my father, reaches out to me and talks to me, it's not something I want. So I finally cut communication with him. I said, with how your reactions to my reaching out about this, I cannot, I don't feel comfortable associating with someone who either unknowingly or knowingly perpetrates child abuse and facilitates it. Because in my mind, it was, he's not just a follower of the religion where you don't know the procedures. He actually knows the procedures. And I was just like, I can't have any part of that. I myself, working in a school, am a mandatory reporter. And for me, I just didn't feel comfortable associating with someone who didn't have the same values as I do. And looking back on it, it's kind of ironic because my father had told me over the years that he was so proud of me that I made the choice I did because I never got baptized, so he could still talk to me. Yeah. Even though I would probably consider myself an apostate, to be honest, because I do speak against the witnesses and the organization. Most of them are very lovely people and well-intentioned. It's just the religion itself is very toxic.
Well, that's a technicality, though, isn't it? You managed to avoid actually getting baptized, and I've got experience in my own family of where behavior that is wildly beyond the bounds of what's considered acceptable morally for Jehovah's Witnesses is tolerated in families purely because the individual managed to avoid getting dunked. So it sounds like, on a technicality, your dad was enjoying almost the best of both worlds. Yeah. But you've kind of very reasonably reached the conclusion that your father isn't just blindly kind of like going along and like a cog in the machine without even knowing. He actually knows and understands these abusive policies, which, like you say, facilitate the abuse of children, to the point where he's even like, oh, well, let's leave it in Jehovah's hands. How you can say that about children being sexually assaulted, I have no idea.
Yeah. And it's gut wrenching. Even right now, I'm sitting and I'm almost shaking because it does. It's very, it's wrong. It's just wrong. Yeah. So I guess the whole basis of me bringing this up is states. There are many states that make clergy mandated reporters, except in terms of confession. So, and that's where it kind of gets shaky with the witnesses, is since it is a very controlling religion, they tell you not to do any research outside of the religion. They tell you to just trust what the Watchtower and the Bible says, or their interpretation of it. And I very recently had a conversation with my stepmother, who my father got remarried at some point, like I said. But when I sent that text message to him, just pretty much stating like, hey, I don't want to talk to you anymore, I'm cutting off things. She reached out to me and she asked me some questions because she was just curious about some things and about how I was raised. And she always wondered why I never really had a good relationship with my father. Like what had happened to cause this rift? Because she herself has 2 children that are not witnesses that didn't get baptized, but she still has a very good relationship with them. And I just told her, well, there were many, many things in my lifetime. And we ended it on a good note. And then she sent me, I want to say about a week later, some articles from the Watchtower. She's like, I just want to set you straight with Jehovah's organization. Yeah. I just want to set you straight with Jehovah's organization. Because I feel like, I understand what you feel. And she even informed me that my father was not an elder anymore, that he had only been an elder for a year. And so she said, it's no surprise that you feel this way about Jehovah's organization. And so she tried to set me straight. She sent me a few articles, and these are articles that I had already read because I keep up with the witnesses and their talk about child abuse, especially. And I just told her, I was like, hey, I know it's against policy, but I would recommend you do some research about how witnesses, look at child abuse.
Well, the wording that they use, I think it's the July 2019 Watchtower is the one that they kind of say, hey, look, this is our amazing policy. And I've done entire videos on the very, very clever use of language and how they very cleverly chosen certain words to portray an image of an organization that's acting responsibly while giving themselves the latitude to do something very different in reality. So yeah.
Is that the article where it states, oh, well, we follow the law. We follow the secular laws in regards to reporting child abuse. And that's my point.
I think they say as well, we strive, something along the lines. We strive wherever possible to report crime. If I'm going to report a crime, I'm going to report a crime. There's not going to be any striving involved. The crime will be reported. It's not going to be a case of, damn, I did strive, but for whatever reason, I failed to report the crime despite my very best efforts. So
it's extremely misleading. Because in states they have some, like I said, some states require mandatory reporting from clergy, but they have a clause in there that excuses confession. And as a religion, and this is what I don't think many witnesses understand, is that religion dictate the laws essentially by which they are governed. If you make a religion, it's protected under the U.S. Constitution because of the freedom of religion amendment. And so, like, I remember my dad making a joke. Well, I could make the religion of myself and create whatever things I wanted, and it would be protected. Okay. So for the witnesses to say, oh, well, we strive to report the crime, they legally could put it as part of their religion as they are mandatory reporters for child abuse. And it would be protected under the law. They wouldn't have to worry about being sued because they broke client-pennant privilege. But they use that, and they even... My dad did say that when victims are talking to them, they even consider that some kind of confession as well. And so with these states that have these clauses where they excuse that, it actually harms the victim and it protects the perpetrator. And many religions do this. The religion can dictate what they consider as confession. And That's where Washington, the state Congress unanimously voted to pass a bill in Washington state making clergy mandated reporters, because Washington didn't have that. It was whoever wanted to report, I guess, to a point. Certain school personnel and doctors were mandatory, but not clergy. But they have the clause of confession. Well, it's going through the House legislature right now, and it's going to go into its second reading here soon. So it's still in the process of the law, but my hope is that that they pay attention to this, because I've been watching the videos of the committees, and they have some really awesome experts in there explaining how the witnesses and Mormons, they do this, they dictate what is confession and how that's dangerous to have that as a broad clause. And
it
how
needs to be absolutely watertight, the wording, so that there's no room for any loopholes here.
Yeah. And they talk about Pennsylvania and Utah.
What can viewers of the channel, because you mentioned that this is something that your particular state, in Washington is addressing now through legislation. What can viewers of the channel do to help put more pressure on lawmakers to, remove these loopholes so that children can be protected?
They can look they can look at their state mandatory reporting laws, and then if they see that clause where it does protect that client-pendant privilege, of reaching out to their state legislatures and being like, hey, religions can use this to protect even the victims' confession, so to speak. They can reach out to their state legislatures and petition them to be like, hey, this isn't right. We need to get this changed because this is harming children. And really put pressure on their state legislatures to change those laws. With what happened was happening in Pennsylvania, somebody reached out to a state legislature over in the Seattle area, and she was the one that petitioned this to put this into play. A couple of years ago, I reached out to my state legislature for where I'm at, and I told them about this. And then my response that I got was, well, my constituents need to have full faith in their clergy that they will keep client-pendant privilege. So in places where there is a more conservative viewpoint, it will be more difficult to change this viewpoint. And it's just super important to protect these voices that don't have a voice, and they don't even know the laws and the policies because they're told not to research it. They're told not to understand it because they're no part of this world, and Jehovah's kingdom and government is going to take over, that kind of thing. So it's just super important to protect these people.
Absolutely. Thank you for explaining that. And again, hopefully viewers can do whatever they can. I mean, to be honest, I'm a little bit jaded about the possibility of fixing things after my experiences with ICSA in the UK, but we just got to keep trying, haven't we? A future generation at some point will see justice, and if we can just keep passing the baton forward and doing what we can in the limited window in which we can operate, we're at least building a foundation that others can work on. So I think you're an incredibly inspirational woman for caring about this and doing something about it in whatever way you can. If there are any viewers watching who have been through or can relate to your experience, and perhaps they're on the fence as to whether they should emancipate themselves or break free from Jehovah's Witness indoctrination, what would be your advice to them?
Maybe look up signs of a toxic environment. Maybe look up what a cult is, and really remind yourself of and really do some soul searching and think, well, what do I want to do? And that sounds very individualistic for those of your viewers who are very who love family, who, you know, their culture is to stay with the family, is, you know, maybe find something that you really love with your heart and just go for it, and fingers crossed, you know, hopefully things work out. But you never know what your life will be until you take a chance. And if I had never taken the chance to get out and really, you know, explore what I wanted, I wouldn't be who I am. And I would be very unhappy. Because you know,
yeah.
But just look up what a cult is. Seriously.
Google cult, and it will all become
Google
clear.
Cult.
Elise, you again are an inspirational woman. I'm so glad that you're able to share your story and your advice with my viewers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. I found it fascinating. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for similar interviews and videos. But for now, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.